Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today, David, for this Dimensions choral conversation. We're really, really excited to have you as our Pros Fellow in college, and I'm really looking forward to really exploring your background, your career, your singing, all the rest of that today. And so a really good place to start, I suppose, as usual, is at the very beginning. So when did you start singing? Why did you start singing? How did that happen? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I have a standard answer when asked, when did I start singing? And the answer is when I came out the womb. I don't know when I didn't sing. I had a mother that loved Marilyn Horne, Victoria de Los Angeles, a father who grew up with military music, played the piano. It was there in the house. But it was certainly not a career choice. I originally wanted to be a dentist like my father. Didn't work out. Then I thought I'd become a chef. It worked out a little later in my career to become a chef. And I went to America on a Rotary Exchange scholarship and won some competitions and actually won a scholarship to go to a university for a summer school. And that kind of ignited the flame, but it was still not a career, but the desire to have a career was there. I came back to Australia. I was 18 years of age. I could not get an apprenticeship as a chef. So a friend of mine said, why don't you audition to be in the opera studio in Sydney? I did. And the joke was, I got accepted. So at 19 years of age, I was the youngest ever to be accepted into the opera studio. And I spent 3 years doing what was then called a Diploma of Operatic Art and Music Theatre, majoring in performance, which is now called the Bachelor of Music Performance. I graduated at the very mature age of 22, expecting the world to give me a career. It didn't. So between 22 and 32, I sang at every opportunity I could get. I sang, in fact, my very first concert that I ever did was for the Premier's Cultural Department, where I think I got the amazing fee of $200 to sing for a pensioner's morning. Off I went.
Glamour.
It was glamour, but it got even better because I did the first half. And in the interval, people asked me if I was going to change my outfit because women always change their dresses. And I said, no, this is all I've got, one suit. So we go back into the second half. The second half starts. And from the front row, a woman, without any hesitation, yelled out, I love the pianist, but God, I can't stand the singer.
Oh dear.
Yes. They withdrew her from the auditorium, gave her something to calm her down, brought her back in, and that was the beginning of my career. So between 22 and 32, I studied further in London. I sang at every opportunity I got. I did recitals throughout America. I did my first Messiah in America. I made my first recording in America of a piece called In Terra Pax by Mr. Finzi, with someone who I'd met in 1980. He invited me years later to come to the university and teach, and that's when the teaching started. And so I don't know when I didn't sing or when I wasn't involved in theatre. I did community theatre at home. I did whatever I could. My hometown luckily had an Italian opera festival. So again, at the ripe old age of 20, I'm now singing Giuseppe Verdi's Un ballo in maschera. Then I sang in Madama Butterfly. Then there was L'Elisir d'Amore. It was something I took for granted. And so when did I start singing? I answer when I came out the womb, because I really don't know when I didn't do music. We started every Saturday. My father would turn on the equivalent of the BBC, which was the ABC. And we'd have classic music going through the house. He'd sit down and play the piano. His mother played the piano. My father would stop. My mother would then put on Carmen with Marilyn Horne or La Traviata with Victoria de Los Angeles. It was just there. And in fact, my father probably played a bigger role because he hated commercial radio.
Right.
And he referred to it as that trash. So in the car, if he was driving us to school, it was the classical music station. And I grew up hearing music I didn't know what it was. I grew up hearing something called Spartacus, but it was by Khachaturian. And all these things that were just played in the house that I took for granted. I thought everyone did this. This was their normal house. So that's where it started. And I've been fortunate to get to where I am now and still on this wonderful journey of something that started on the 30th of March, 1961 at 6 o'clock at night. There I was. There was what I often refer to as the best drug my parents ever gave me.
It's obviously endured as a lasting influence. I mean, you've made a career out of it. I'm interested in, did you have any sort of formal training? 'Cause you said at 18 you went and auditioned and got into the conservatoire. Did you have any sort of formal training before that? Did you sing in any sort of school choirs, or do any sort of amateur theatre productions where you had any formal training? Because to turn up at 18 and go, well, I'm not going to be a chef, I'm going to be a singer, and suddenly to get into quite a large scale conservatoire is incredibly impressive.
It was a shock. I'd sung in the chorus of all these major opera works that were staged in my hometown with full symphony orchestras, and I just stood around. It was fun. I just went and sang in the chorus. And my first role I ever did was Joe in Showboat. And I'd had voice lessons in America. In 1979, when I turned up, they realized I could sing. So I was entered into the secondary school singing competition.
Mm.
I got through to the finals at the state level. I didn't win, but I got a 4-week scholarship. And at the university, I met a gentleman called Ron Jeffers, and he started me on this path. And at the same time, I met a gentleman called Steve Beethan, who ran the local Choral group in the town where I was an exchange student. So I learned from Steve and I learned from Ron. And for the first time in my life, I could actually get credits towards graduation from music subjects. Because when I left Australia at 17, I'd done English, math, history, physics, geography, the standard board subjects. And I get to America and they say, what would you like to do? And I said, well, can I do mixed choir, a cappella choir, glee club, everything. And I ended up having a schedule that was just full of all the lovely things I wanted to do. And I still managed to get a 4-point GPA, which was enough to get into any university I wanted by simply doing the things I loved. So that was probably the most formal training. And then I had singing lessons from people in my hometown, but not the sort of lessons I now know that are required, but I was given pieces to sing. And I won Eisteddfods, were very big when I was at school. And I remember singing Oasis and Osiris in my first Eisteddfod and got 100 points and first prize and $50. And I went, okay. And so the real training actually didn't happen even in my undergraduate years. The real training happened after, when you get out, because you leave a conservatorium and you think, well, I'm an opera singer, give me a job. At 19, 20, 21, just 22, I had no idea. I had the basics, but not enough to have a career. So then I went, because my father is British, I was able to live in Britain. So I was introduced through a teacher of mine who'd studied at the Royal College of Music. And I was introduced to a pair of singing teachers, a husband and wife team called Audrey Langford and Andrew Field. I sang for them, and 6 weeks later, on the 26th of December 1985, Boxing Day, I'd left Australia at 40 degrees and I landed at Heathrow at -10 and wondered what in the hell had happened.
Wow.
That is where the really hard work started. And I did 6 years private study with them from 22 to 32. And at 32, I was developed enough to then go and audition for jobs. And the next turn was being accepted into the Zurich Opera Studio, which was a training program. And if I thought getting into the conservatorium was tough, the Zurich Opera Studio at the time was one of the very few studios in the world. Covent Garden didn't have one, the Metropolitan didn't have one. They took 20 singers from the world. I got a position.
Excellent.
I
Yeah.
I was fairly settled vocally as to where I wanted to go.
Hmm.
Because my teacher had already said, you've got to wait 10 years. You're not going to sing any of the repertoire you want between 22 and 32. Your voice is too big. No one's going to give a 22-year-old the repertoire you will finally sing. So I did all these jobs. I remember my first production in the United Kingdom was a piece by Delius called A Village Romeo and Juliet.
Of course, wonderful piece of music.
Wonderful piece. Oh, I backtrack, I tell a lie. Before that, I did Chabrier's version of Tristan and Isolde, which is Gwendolen.
Hmm.
And it was performed in a university even further north than Durham. It was performed at the Hull University Music Department.
Right.
The music director there was called Alan Lang, and he knew the voice teachers I went to, and he used to bring in young singers. All the students in the university provided the chorus. So, we had Vikings and fair maidens all over the stage. And because Hull at the time, one of the industries was the tannery, we all had animal furs on. We all smelt like the local tannery wearing goats. And we had fog machines not working one night and fog machines overworking the next night. One night, the soprano and I were singing, and there was nothing to see. We were just behind this cloud. So I did that. Then I did A Village Romeo and Juliet at the same university. Then I dropped down to Cambridge, to the Cambridge University Opera Group, and I did my first Timur and Turandot at the Mumford Theatre.
Hmm.
So I just went where anyone wanted me to sing, because the hardest thing to realize is you don't walk into top jobs.
Hmm.
So between that, the studying, the recitals in America, I worked as a telephonist for a courier company sending bikes all over London with packages. I did whatever it took to advance my career.
And so this all whilst you were studying with Audrey Langford and Andrew Field. So that whenever you were studying with them in London, that wasn't that's that 6 year period. That wasn't part of a particular course or a particular studio. That was just studying with them and living alongside and in preparation, a sort of a large build up to the next stage.
Absolutely. It was 6 years of private study. When I first came to London, I lived at the Royal Rectory, Farnham Common, and I used to travel from Farnham Common on the 125s, I think they were called then, into Paddington, take a train from Paddington to Victoria, Victoria to Bromley South. They encouraged me to come to any lessons I wanted to.
Mm.
So I would often turn up 2 hours in advance just to listen what was going on.
Mm.
Because often you don't hear it in your own voice, but you hear it when someone else does it. So I did that. My first trip was 4 months, and they gradually grew and grew and grew. And it was just all private study. And I was fortunate that Audrey Langford had sung at the Royal Opera, and the only thing that stopped her career was the war came along.
Mm.
And Andrew Field had his lineage of Heddle Nash and Bugatti in Italy came through in their teaching, and that stood me in good in a good foundation. So it was all private study, and it was all financed by either I worked in London or as a courier coordinator, or this is where the cooking came in. I'd fly back to Australia. I had a friend who had a catering company, and he'd say, here's a job for you. I'd go and work as a chef for 3 months.
Mm.
And I would get money together, and I would fly back to London. And then I just did whatever it took. I'd become so addicted to this drug called music. I did anything. I did anything to have a career. It's all I wanted.
I particularly like that flying back and working for the catering companies. There seems to be something quite intrinsic about opera singers, food and planes. If you follow, there's that documentary on the BBC about Pavarotti and his food. Andrew Owens, the famous tenor at the moment, all his Instagram stories are filled with him singing and then him cooking. It seems to all fit in quite nicely. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Heddle Nash and that sort of school of singing being passed on. Was there a particular school of singing in London or in England at that time that was being taught, that was popular? What did that look like and sound like, and why was it so popular, and how did that affect your own learning and your own singing?
It's interesting because there is an English school of singing, there's an Italian school, there's a German school, there's a French school. I learnt from the husband called Andrew Field, who was also a qualified sound engineer. So he understood a lot about sound waves, overtones, undertones. He learnt from Heddle Nash, who learnt from Bugatti in Italy. So I never came down the English school. I came down the Italian school, because while Andrew Field sounded somewhat English, it wasn't what you would say is an English sound. Heddle Nash is certainly not what you would call an English sound. So it set me up quite well, because the repertoire I finally went into was Verdi, Wagner, and Strauss. And I'm not saying that one technique is better than the other, but for me, the Italian technique was the one that set me up the best. I have tried the German technique. I had a colleague who was convinced that I was singing with too much round sound. Can we just flatten it down a bit? And after 20 minutes, the voice had gone. And I said, no, I quite like the round Italian, pure open vowel sound. And that was the lineage I followed. And if you heard me say when I was born, you know how old I am, and it still works to this day. And in fact, it worked this morning. I get up every morning of my life and I do my exercises. I apply what I've learned, because I don't know what else to do.
There's it's interesting that you mentioned that German sound as well. I mean, there's a wonderful masterclass with Salvatore Fischella, who's giving this masterclass when he's 70, and it still works beautifully. And he says that the trick with the Italian school of singing is that it's all nice and free, and there's a round sound, as you say, that goes up and down. And he said the problem with the Germans is that they just want to scream. But do you think that being trained in that Italian school rather than in an English school is one of the reasons that helped you have such a successful career in Germany, on the continent, doing these Italian operas, that this style of singing set you up then to go to these opera studios in Germany?
What was interesting, the reason I got work once I left the opera studio, I got the work purely on the voice, and every job I got in Zurich was, can you sing the Uscire in Rigoletto? Can you sing the first Ghost in Macbeth? Everything started to be Verdi because of the sound I made. When I left the opera studio, my first contract was in a theatre called then it was called the Mainfranken Theater Würzburg. I was engaged purely if I could sing Il Trovatore. I turned up, got the job. Then they realized what they had. Then they wanted that voice that sang the Italian to sing the German. They still wanted the beauty, even though the language changed. And I remember when I got my first guest contract, which was in Leipzig in 95, 96, they had auditioned in Leipzig every week for a year to find a baritone.
Wow.
And I had sung the production that they were casting I just sung it. It was my second year contract. So I just turned up and stood on the stage and sung. And they went, that's the voice we want. That then started to kick things off. I went from Leipzig, I got invited to go to the Komische Opera Berlin. And it was not a career move. I thought, oh, this is going to be good, because everything was sung in German. Little did I know, they wanted the Italian sound singing German. They understood the beauty of the voice. And I was very lucky. It was Harry Kupfer's wife, Mariana Kupfer, who was the one who said, here you come. And I sang there as a guest for 9 years. It was a very successful partnership, but it was always the Italian repertoire. If I went for German repertoire, they used to say, it's too beautiful. And I said, but where does it say, please scream? When I sang Corvinal in my first Tristan and Isolde, the only Wagner I've ever sung to date, the conductor said, it's so beautiful. And I said, where's the problem? Where is the problem having a beautiful voice? But I didn't get jobs because it was too beautiful for some people. They wanted, the German school can have a bit more snarl to it. It can be a bit more knurdled in the throat. The longer I'm in Germany, the longer I understand how it all works. And no one school is better than the other. I just happen to have gone down the Italian school that suited my temperament, my voice, and it's how all my teachers taught. I didn't understand that at the beginning, but when I look back, I had a teacher at the conservatorium, I had a private teacher, and then I went to London. That was it. Mm. They all taught down the Italian school of singing, because the Italian school is based on pure A-E-I-O-U, no diphthongs. Mm. And it is a very open throat. This is in its basic format. It just happened to suit my sound, and I got all that Verdi work. And then when I suddenly sang my first Johannahan, I remember the theatre saying to my agent, "We need a Johannahan," and the agent said, "Do you want a screamer or do you want a singer?" And the house said, "We want a beautiful voice." And they came and heard me, and before the night was out, there was the contract on my desk. "You're going to Stuttgart to sing Johannahan."
Wonderful. And do you think
they wanted the beauty.
Yeah. Do you think that's big then? Thinking of people who want to go and try and make careers in opera, is it about whenever people are casting or asking agents for singers? Do you think it's about that particular type of voice that they want to match the parts, or is there other elements of performance, of being able to act, being able to be a good musician, to be able to sight read, all of these other things that we built in behind? Is it purely about the voice that they want to match, or is there a wider element that they look for things as well in these productions?
It used to be, can he sing? No one ever wanted to know anything. I remember, in fact, my audition here at the Komische Opera, I was a much bigger boy, and I stood on the stage and I sang, and I remember the director going, "My God, look at the size of him." And Harry Kupfer and his wife said, "Listen to the voice." That voice, people, if you can get someone who looks good, who acts well and moves well, plus a voice, you've got a bonus. I did, even though I was a bigger boy, move well, sing well, and I learned to act well. Now they want people to look. If you're casting Mimi, they want someone who looks like Mimi. Unfortunately, some of the casting now is getting so young, and some of the people don't have the experience to deliver. Whilst Mimi may only be an 18 or a 20-year-old girl, if you cast someone that young, what knowledge do they have? I'm not saying that at 60 you cast someone to sing Mimi, but I think we have to be very careful that we don't make the expectations unachievable, because we then treat singers as disposable people. And again, I was lucky at the time I came through, the people I worked with and coached with and rehearsed with cared. I had the luxury in my debut in Berlin of 16 weeks rehearsal, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Those days are gone.
So would you say that's not standard anymore for? I'm guessing that most people listening won't have. They might be interested in opera or go and see an opera, but they won't have knowledge of the process of how all of this works together. So is that period of rehearsal standard sort of per contract, or maybe you might tell us a little bit more about that particular case and how that sort of evolved?
Well, every contract I had in Germany as a guest were always a very reasonable rehearsal period, sometimes 6 weeks. The shortest rehearsal period I did was not a show that I had planned to be in, but it was a jump in, and it consisted of 1 hour. Luckily, by the time the 1 hour job came along, I was already well and truly trained how to make rehearsals work. Now it's about money. How quickly can we get the people here? How little money do we pay them? And it's all about finance now. So I was lucky to have, as I said, for Macbeth, 16 weeks. I did 12 weeks before the summer vacation and then 4 weeks before the premiere, just to make sure I hadn't lost it. And there was no hope. the director was a woman called Christina Mielitz, and she comes down this other interesting lineage in my career of Harry Kupfer, Walter Felsenstein, and the Komische Opera. They were really into creating singing actors. And I'm blessed that the reviews that I have gotten have referred to me as a singing actor. It doesn't mean I can't sing. It's just that they see what I have strived to perfect. And at my age, I'm still trying to perfect, and I'm trying to pass it on to people, because gone are the days where you stand and sing. We want people to be believable. And if you go into that area of being a singing actor, it makes singing so much easier, because you're not worried about how beautiful is my tone. It's what is my character doing? What does my character want to say? And how do I bring that through? And Felsenstein had a very simple 3 little phrases: think it, feel it, sing it. Harry Kupfer used to say, think it, feel it, sing it, and he added, understand it, so the audience would understand it. That is why the Komische Opera stayed in German for so long, because Harry Kupfer's belief was, when I look down to read the translation, something has happened on the stage and I didn't see it. So why have I gone to the trouble of creating something if you're looking away at the translation? So it was theatre for the people, that they could sit in their own language, listen, and never once have to look away. So that set me up for life. And when I did my first job in Australia, it was for La Traviata. And by the time I got out there, I'd probably done 70 performances. So it was a piece I knew well. And I remember they said, now we want you to come on, say the lines, take your hat off, take your gloves off, put the hat and gloves down, sit on the chair and sing the duet. I did it. And the guy said, would you like to do it again? I said, sure. So I did it. And he said, you seem to pick this up quickly. And I said, oh, in Germany, before you open your mouth, you've come on, you've made a cup of tea, you've baked a cake, you've assassinated 6 people, I've done a few cartwheels, then I sing. So I was programmed into this Felsenstein methodology and approach to performing, which I adore. And it also, while you're concentrating on what can the character do, you don't have time to get nervous.
That's really interesting, and I want to come back to the Felsenstein stuff in a second. I think that idea that's all encompassing. It's very interesting that this is in the context of opera in Germany, because it's almost a Wagnerian idea of it's not opera, it's a music drama, and that there's this sort of almost Gesamtkunstwerk of the singer, that all of it sort of works together.
Absolutely. And it became, we've just had a death this week of Neuenfels, who was one of the big Regie Theater. And that's what Felsenstein was into, Regie Theater. Don't stand and sing. I got to tell you, standing still and singing is bloody difficult. Being involved as a character, it's the overall picture that you're creating. I agree 100%. It's so important.
So where then did you meet to Felsenstein, or meet this methodology? Can you tell us a bit more about some of the productions you were in at that time, and how this really fed into your own work? You've told us a little bit about a couple of instances where that was sort of put into practice, but how did you meet and originally engage with this sort of think it, feel it, sing it approach to things?
It was my debut in Berlin, where I was given, my debut was the lead role, or the title role, of Macbeth. It was in German. Didn't worry me. I was going to Berlin. I was in, it wasn't quite the capital city of Germany as it is now. It was still, you think, it was still very much, you could still see the divide in buildings, in architecture, in people. But I went, and from day one, it was there. Every time I coached, I had a repetiteur called Hannah. And Hannah spent the first 3 weeks going, no, I don't want beautiful singing. I don't believe it. It's beauty and it's boring. Convince me that what you're singing is the only way it can be expressed. So that was in the musical part. Then I would go to rehearsals, and you would do 8 hours a day. And then I would have a director, and she'd go, no, I want this. Now, call it indoctrination. I was schooled in this way for 16 weeks. But then, when you see the results, they stand for themselves. So that's when this whole thing started. I thought, if for nothing else, for my own benefit, what can I gain out of this? So I took that initial contact with Felsenstein and started to move it around wherever I went. So if I went to do Cavaliere Rusticana and Pagliacci in France, I took it. And I made sure that everything I did had a reason. There was a thought behind it. And I kept it going and I kept it going. And then I did a Salome and I did a Bluebeard's Castle, and people started saying the wonderful singing actor, David Wakeham. And you went, wow, it does work. And then, of course, the crowning glory of having it working is a couple of years later, the Komische Opera gave me a double contract, and they said, we'd like you to do Falstaff. It's not the premiere, it's the rerun, but then we're going to mount a brand new Rigoletto for you. And I went, sure. The person who directed the Rigoletto had also been in this school. So we then did weeks and weeks. That wasn't 16 weeks. I think it was about 10 or 12. Then you get a review that says, David Wakeham saves the Komische Opera. Without David Wakeham in the title role, the singing actor, the opera would have been a flop. And you go, it does work. It does work. And I didn't need those reviews to substantiate that, because I knew how I felt as a singer when I got into that, call it the state of flow. I committed myself to think it, feel it, sing it. Everything became amazing. I was fulfilled not only mentally, spiritually, musically, physically, because I gave my entirety to this methodology. And I've done it ever since. And I can't sing without it.
I wonder if you might just to pick up on it, if you might explain a little bit about what that state of flow is, because and this is probably a good point to mention as well, that you've written a doctoral thesis on Felsenstein and this methodology. Can you just explain a little bit more about what this state of flow is, and why the Felsenstein methodology is so important to it?
In a very simplified form, state of flow is when you are in the state of being where time becomes irrelevant. Some people say, oh, you're in the spot. The state of flow is, for me, much more. It's much deeper. Felsenstein wanted you to get to the state where when you opened your mouth and sang, there was no other possibility. What you delivered was the best that was out there, because you had thought it, you had felt it, and you delivered it. There was no hesitation. And I remember when I got to the end of the premiere of Rigoletto, I was standing in the shower and I thought, I could do this all again. I didn't feel tired. I had committed my body, my soul, my heart. And I got to the end and it was like, really? I've just sung 3 hours of a major role. And then I started doing more and more in this direction. And the more I applied it, I got into the zone where the character became me, or I became the character. It wasn't David singing Rigoletto. I've screamed on stage. But if I'm in the state of flow, what comes out of my mouth is not me. It's the character. So therefore, I'm not trying to control it. I react with a very gut felt reaction. They become real. So hatred can become violent. I've thrown people. I have thrown people across the stage and gone, the soprano comes to you and says, David, what did you do? And I say, I don't know. I got myself to be the character. And that's what this whole approach is about. You get right inside the person so you can do anything that person can do.
Mm.
I would not intentionally pick someone up and throw them against a wall. But I remember in Stuttgart was the first time it happened. I was singing my first Johanna Hahn with a very famous soprano from the Vienna Staatsoper. And I had to throw her. And one night I literally made her hit the wall and her head went back and smashed against the wall. She was smart enough to take what had happened and she turned it into the most erotic moment that she was now even more turned on by Johanna Hahn because he was a brute and she wanted this.
Mm.
And that's what happens when you get into the state of flow. When I got to the end of Rigoletto, and I've seen a video clip, and I come out to take a bow at the end, and you see on my face there's almost like no one there, because I hadn't switched back from being Rigoletto to David. I was still turning the clock back. And even when I turned up at the reception, I'm looking around thinking, what are you all doing here? I didn't do anything. I was there. And it makes singing for me so enjoyable if you can go there. The downside of it is you have to be open to go there. And when you are open as a performer, you're vulnerable. But that's what makes it appealing to people.
Do you think it then? Do you think it has the possibility to pose a problem in performance then? Because if you're getting in this state of flow, and by the way you're describing it, it feels like it's almost as if you're not singing, but you're becoming that character, and that you're fully living and inhabiting their world. If something unexpected happens on stage and you need to react quickly, do you think the character's reaction, or do you have to still maintain an element of awareness to know that this is what we have to do, and balancing that is quite important?
Yeah, it's very important. You never give your entire self, because in a production of Il Trovatore we had a guest, and I was doing my performance, and they said to the soprano, when David lifts his hands, the drawbridge is going to come down. Don't be anywhere near the drawbridge. And I'm singing away, and I put my hand up, and as I gave the signal for the drawbridge to come down, she was under it. So in that split second, you step out, you grab her, you put her back in safety, and then I turned what she had done into hatred, because in Trovatore she falls in love with the tenor, and there's a bit of pushback going on. So I learned how to take a situation and make it into something, as opposed to, gee, she just hit the wall, what do I do now? It permitted you to think, whilst keeping a small percentage of yourself that sits here or here, that keeps an eye. I don't ever want to put colleagues in danger, ever. But I think it's fantastic, and I try to encourage my students to do it. When I give master classes, whenever I get the opportunity, I want people to understand how great it is, because we want people to be believable. You don't have to stab someone in real life to be believable. You have to understand what they do, why they do it, what are they feeling, then take it and put it inside your body and say, well, what would my character do? And it's amazing how many things you can do if you are the person. Falstaff was another example. Falstaff is never off the stage. And I was doing things that went on and on and on and on and on. But I was so much him, enjoying playing this absolutely buffoon of a man who thought he was God's gift to women. Once I got inside him, everything I did was him. I had people come to me afterwards and say, in one production, for example, I was sitting in a beer keg. And as I stood up out of the beer keg, what was apparent to the audience is I was completely naked and I had a fat suit on. And some of my fans came to get an autograph afterwards and said, Mr. Wakeham, how could you do that? And I said, but I didn't. I didn't do it. Falstaff did it. I believed so much in this character. I mean, I used to put my finger between my toes and sniff it. All right, I put this finger between my nose and I sniffed this one, but to the audience, it looked like you were doing. And they were mortified, but it wasn't me. I don't sniff my own toes.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. I mean, obviously, this methodology works incredibly well, and you've made quite the career from it. And pulling back to the conversations drawing through Heddle Nash and over Langford and things like that. This is obviously another element, as well as the singing technique in the Italian schools, that's coming down a line in generations. And so, are you passing this on then? Is it obviously these aren't sort of going to die out? How are you passing these on to the next generation of singers, to the students you teach? Do you do much teaching in alongside your current singing work?
All right, to put this into a paraphrase that people at Durham will understand, does Van Mildert have ducks? Yes. Yes, from the minute I was introduced to it, I was convinced. The longer I have done it, the more research I did into it. I went to the Academy of Art here in Berlin, and they had 6,000 or 7,000 pieces of Felsenstein's correspondence, letters, diaries. When you read it, he was absolutely convinced, absolutely convinced this was the way to go. So in my teaching, I then thought, well, how can I pass it on to a student? If a student doesn't know why they do something, they just repeat. So in my teaching, I will say, think about it, feel it, sing it. Let's work out, let's make it yours. And I do that wherever I go, because if there's no logic in what you do, it's just beautiful notes. And I don't have to be converted to it. I'm there. I do talk about it as often as I can. I talk about being committed. And a lot of people say, commit, but what does that mean? Are you asking me to commit to the music, commit to the words, commit to the actions? I'm asking for everything. I want everything. And because I've done it and I've been successful at it, I know it works. So it goes on, and I read as much as I can. I've got a fan come friend here in Berlin, and I'm trying to get her to sell me the books of Walter Felsenstein, because they were printed behind the wall. They are not in publication anymore, and you can't get them. And I've said to her, if you ever want to sell them, please, I want the books, because it's not there anymore. We're not going down that path. And I don't want it to die out, because I know the benefits far outweigh it. Yes, you have to be prepared to commit. Yes, it's tough work, but you don't enter this career if you want an easy ride.
Yeah, and it sounds like as well that the that paraphrase of or addition to, rather, of the Felsenstein that you mentioned earlier seems to come in quite strongly from what you were saying at the beginning of that about teaching using this, that it's think it, feel it, sing it, and understand it. That whenever you're teaching, that understanding is quite a big part of it. So is this? I wonder if you talk a little bit more about your teaching philosophy then, or the sort of the way that you teach using this methodology, and how this helps really helps with the element of understanding when it comes to learning, with technique and with performance, and with all of these elements coming together as the singing actor.
For Felsenstein to work, you have to assume you have a vocal technique that is reliable. You know, you can't become a champion rower if you can't row. So to become a successful opera singer or concert pianist, anything that's practice-led, you have to be able to do that skill. I can't become a brain surgeon because I don't possess those skills. So that's how I teach both simultaneously. We talk about the Italian school of pure vowels. We talk about singing on the breath. We talk about bel canto, legato. Then I start to drip feed in how Walter can help you achieve those things. And what is interesting is that when you take the brain away from, I have to make a beautiful sound, and I say, what is your thought? If the technique is secure, they can achieve it. And that's probably the hardest thing, because you have to go from the known to the unknown. So most students come with a technique and you can't pull it apart. because then you crumble the student, pardon me. So Audrey Langford used to say, to get this far, it can't all be wrong. So we take what they know and we work towards the unknown.
Mm.
Every person is different. We learn at a different rate. We accept things differently. So the challenge is, how do you drip feed?
Mm.
How quickly do you give students things to think about? If they're struggling with point one, sometimes you have to let point one go and move on. And the further they go into it, they'll then understand what point one was.
Mm.
I don't expect my students to understand everything from the get-go.
Mm.
I'll start filling them, because what's important to me is not whether the student and I agree, but that I challenge the student. I challenge you to show me something. You may show me something and I go, never thought of that. Fantastic. Let's accept it.
Mm.
I can't know everything, but I'll know a lot more than you purely because of my age and what I've done.
Mm.
But I will never disregard your knowledge. And that's the important thing when teaching. You can't disregard what that student brings. Otherwise, you will crumble the student.
Mm.
You take it, and slowly, if you're clever, you turn a few corners, and eventually they start to trust you. Trust is a very big thing when teaching something you can't see.
Mm. I suppose that's a big bit of singing as well. That almost everything happens inside, and so it really takes the knowledge of how it should be thought about, how it should feel, and then ultimately how it should sound and be more generally as well, I suppose.
Absolutely. And we all come with preconceived ideas of what our voice should be. You have to do enough study and enough preparation that you are still prepared to accept someone else. Because if I stand in front of you and I do A and you decide to do C, I go, what happened to B? But I have to prepare enough, and I teach enough with the student that if they throw something back that is not what I thought, I very quickly have to think, how do I take this?
Mm.
What can I do with this to help the student? Because the student's given me something back. I have to give something back in return. So it can't always be A, B, C, and D. Mm. So preparation to a point within the constraints, but still remaining flexible to accept what they offer.
Mm. And I think it's interesting as well that there's almost something embedded and psychological in this. And I know from a previous conversation that you were I can't remember where it was you were working, but you said that you'd managed to try this out with some horn players. Is that right?
This summer I was teaching at the Berlin Opera Academy, which because of COVID, unfortunately, we had to be based in a lovely town in the Swiss Alps. And,
what a shame!
It was horrible. We had fresh gelati, fresh cheese, cows walking past the rooms, and it got around the academy that there was this teacher that said things differently. And so by the end of the 8 weeks, I was teaching French horn players and trombone players about the mental game that goes into performing. Mm. And for them, it was interesting because they'd heard it, but they'd never heard it from a voice teacher. And all I was doing was reiterating what their teachers said from a voice perspective. And I said, do you know why you do that? Or are you just triple tonguing for the hell of it? What are you trying to achieve? Mm. And for me, it was fantastic to be able to take it and then say to an instrumentalist, because an instrumentalist also doesn't hear the sound till it leaves the instrument. There's a lot of trust. Mm. And I always say for a singer, until the sound leaves your mouth and oxygenates with the room, you don't know what it sounds like. Mm. That's why you shouldn't listen to it. That's why if your character does something, what comes out will be correct. Mm. So it was very interesting. And that was the first time I'd applied it to instrumentalists. I've since applied it to pianists and said the same thing. Why are you playing that phrase? Don't just give me a beautiful, phrase. Show me you understand what it's there. And when I teach, I talk about brownie points in music. Why did the composer suddenly put an augmented chord? There's a reason. It's not just there to make it sound beautiful. Mm. Go beyond the words, explore. I challenge you to research why these things are done. They're all done for a reason. We just have to work out why.
Yeah, and it's interesting because then that really raises the question of performance as a as something in itself, and as an art that we can study singing, we can study the techniques, we can study playing an instrument, we can study the techniques, but ultimately there's something incredibly common that binds this all these musical instruments and things together, and that's that element of performance, and that it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're a French horn player or a singer, or whether you're playing the flute, or whether you're a percussionist, that there's still this unifying element of performance as something to be studied and understood.
Absolutely. And I was talking to a doctor this morning, a doctor of music, and we were talking about this autoethnography, and he was saying how it is slowly taking its place where it should be. Because if you're talking about practice-led research or performance-led research, I know research wants the latest edition, the latest book. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're looking at the 8th of February, 2022 edition of David Wakeham. Tomorrow, I will be a new edition by what has happened today. And so I've become a bit of a rabbit, and I'm searching things out, and I want to know why. And I'm very happy that this approach to research is gaining ground, because it can't all just be what someone said in a book. If I write about myself, it's very hard to reference. Someone has to write the first book. So if I want to reference me, I can say, I totally disagree, but I've got to find another book that someone wrote on themselves. You've got to reference like with like. You can't say, I'm going to write about an orange and I'm going to reference a banana.
And how do you work this all in then with this autoethnographic approach of writing about yourself? How in research, how do you make sure that you're not just telling a story about yourself? How do you make sure that you're thinking critically about these things, and that there's no sort of personal bias in the way that we talk about ourselves? How do we make sure that this autoethnographic approach as a methodology is substantiated in ultimately what research and these sorts of things strive for, which is an element of truth, not necessarily fact, but how do we work with that, with these methodologies, and particularly in performance, which is the area which your research sort of inhabits?
We rely on what other people tell us. So I rely on reviews. Have I achieved? So if I get a review, I can see it hanging on the wall. If I see a review that says David Wakeham saved the Comische Opera, he's a wonderful singing actor, I go, tick. I did it. I rely on feedback. I have a trust network. I work with a pianist here who will shoot me down in flames and just look at me and go, well, that was lovely. What do you want out of that? We do have to rely. I go back to my library. I look at the scores. I've got recordings of voice lessons. I have books where I've written things down. I can actually pull off the shelf of my library here my Macbeth score, because I told a fib and said I'd lost it, so I could keep it. And it is full of all the Felsenstein-esque approaches. I have the Falstaff score. Same thing. Said I lost it. I think by the time I said I'd lost Rigoletto, they realized they weren't going to get them. But I kept them because they were my notepads. And I can go and look at a bar and say, on page 28, bar 32, at the second eighth note, I did this because, and I've written down, move your foot is what the direction they've been, and then I've put a little note underneath it, because this is the effect they want. Try and make it your own. I can substantiate a lot, and a lot of it is because it's worked. I'm not about to lead anyone a merry dance or down the garden path just for the hell of it. If it doesn't work, I won't talk about it. And the challenge is sometimes it doesn't work immediately the way I've said it. So I have to find another way to say the same thing for the student to react, and then you turn it around. But I rely heavily on what other people tell me, the reaction. And when you do a performance and you have 2,000 people stand up and give you a standing ovation for 6 minutes. I must have done something right.
Mm.
And then people go, we don't know how you do it. And you go, neither did I, because it wasn't me. It was something else. So you do rely on other people. I've become analytical when I listen to things, when I sing. Am I actually giving people what I want to give them, or am I giving them a watered down version?
Mm.
And I don't want that. I want to give you me. I want you to see that it's not David that's hurting, it's the character that hurts. And I will do whatever I can to go there, because it saves this, believe it or not.
Mm.
My technique is secure. I can give you all the pain and the anger you want. And I come away and go, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great. And I mean, yeah, it's fascinating to hear all this, and it's fascinating to be, you know, to be told how all of these things work, and to hear about the career and the accumulation of all this experience and all of this teaching and these different lineages. But the real question, I suppose, is when do we get to experience it ourselves? You're our prize fellow here in Van Mildert College. When will we get a chance in the future to hear experience in real life the Felsenstein methodology in action, the Italian School of Singing in action, all of this accumulation? Will it arrive with the ducks at some point?
Well, it was to arrive in 2020. Of course, COVID hit, and I had arranged with the then principal, David Harper, I was going to come and give a preview of my Carnegie Hall recital at Van Mildert. COVID put an end to that, and I am happy to say that there is a recital planned. We will keep our fingers crossed, and we will do whatever we can to make sure that it goes ahead in April this year. I think it's April. Yep. Where I will strut my stuff, to say, and there'll be people like your good self and Miss Sarah Bailey who will be in the concert with me. And yes, I'm really finally that we're getting to a point where it's going to really happen, because there's nothing more I like doing. I love teaching, but when you can actually show it, people often respond much quicker. Mm. So that will happen in April. And then after that, we're in the process of arranging a WA Pros fellow artist in residency, where I will make myself available for the music societies within the university. Anyone that wants to come and talk to me about singing career, music, vocal health, where do we go? Can you tell me about what you've researched? All that sort of stuff. And I'm really happy that it's finally going to happen. We just have to make sure now that we all stay healthy, and that we can go ahead and finally perform with or without the ducks.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and it's very exciting that we're going to be able to have you here for a bit in Mildert as well, and I'm sure people will want to keep an eye out for dates and all of this happening. What about after then? What's your next big performance opera wise? Have you got anything lined up in particular?
I was quite sad that on the day, the 20th of March 2020, when Angela Merkel closed every theatre in Germany, I had just sung at the Staatsoper for Daniel Barenboim. And I had accepted 3 contracts, which they offered on the spot. That was that. COVID wiped them out. I'm happy to say that I have signed a contract to sing in an all-star studded cast of Electra, conducted by Daniel Barenboim, which I believe is in May, June this year. And so that's the big one coming up. There's a few other things floating around. I'm also revisiting some repertoire from years gone by. I do a lot of teaching and consultation for voice teachers. I do a lot of work with professionals who come and say, look, if you're still doing it now, what in the hell are you doing? I need to get back on the path. I enjoy teaching, but I enjoy singing. I've been able to combine both of them really well. And I think the teaching has helped me become a better performer, and the performer has made me become a better teacher. Mm. Because if I can't tell you how it happens, I can't teach you. And by teaching you, I understand my own technique. And I still, during the big lockdown, I rehearsed 11 operas at the Staatsoper. I went in every week and we just sang through everything I had in my repertoire. I'm just doing what I can, and I want to pass on this. Well, the German career has been 28 years, and I started my first professional gig at 22. So for 38 years, I've been doing what I love, and I want to pass on this enthusiasm to students and show them that it's not just singing C major scales in some resonant less room in the basement of a building. Learn why you do it. How can you benefit from it? And I say to my students, why are you singing that scale? If you don't know, ask me, I will tell you. So I apply it all, and we keep our fingers crossed that in April this year, we finally get to do what should have happened last year. And of course, it'll be on a new Steinway piano.
Of course, absolutely, with them being wheeled into the university almost
as we speak. Yeah, wheeled as we speak.
As we speak, or as we sing. And I think as well, that last little bit you said, I think there's some really great advice there for young singers coming through and ones who are aspiring to go to music college or to go and to join opera academies or opera studios and go and be an opera singer. I think that's some really, really valuable advice.
And ask the question, why? If you don't know why you're doing it, what benefit is it to you? I did meet a student this summer, and I asked her to demonstrate how she warmed up. I then said to her, why do you do it? And her answer was, because my teacher told me to. And I said, but if you don't know why you're doing it, you could do it for 20 minutes and you still won't be warm. You'll be exhausted. So challenge. I want to be challenged. I love it when a student challenges me. Sometimes I want to give them a quick smack and say, get back in your box. But by being challenged, I have to make sure I understand. If I don't understand it, then I have to go away and do some research, and I have to think, how do I say this to my student? And if a student thinks that their lesson stops when they leave my room, they better think again, because I will often spend time at night thinking, why didn't Josie get that? What is it that I can say? And you become a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a mother, a father, a mentor. You become everything to this student, because I'm asking you to trust me with something you can't see.
And I think that's quite important as well. It's again as much in the holistic aspect of performance. There's a holistic aspect of teaching there as well. And so I think as we, I mean, it's been one hell of a career, and it's been a real pleasure to hear about it over many years, many performances, many teachers and strategies, many operas, many roles. And so as we come towards the end of this interview, we should finish with some quick fire favorites, I think. Do you have a favorite role that you've played, or a favorite opera?
I say my favorite opera is always the one I'm currently singing. I've been very fortunate. I've never sung anything I didn't like.
Fully invested in each of the roles.
Absolutely. From the smallest role to the biggest role, I've given my all.
Excellent. Do you have a favourite opera house or performance venue in general?
Well, I did get to go to La Scala Milan, so I can't complain.
Very nice.
But I am going to sing at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden this year, and I've already sung on the stage, and I know the house, and I cannot wait. The acoustic is fantastic, and when Maestro Barenboim stands before me, I'd walk over cut glass for that opportunity.
Absolutely. And on that note, favorite director and conductor that you've worked with?
Oh, my favorite conductor was the man who actually turned my career when I was 32, was an Italian conductor, or is an Italian conductor, called Nello Santi. And I remember bouncing out onto the stage as a precocious 32-year-old to sing one line in Rigoletto. I did it as instructed. He put the baton down and he hit the stand and called me forward. And my immediate reaction was, what have I done? And he said to me, what do you normally sing? And I said, oh, I've just sung Macbeth. And he said, I want to work with you. I want to work with you. I said, okay. That man and the other baritone in the show was another favorite of mine called Juan Pons. So the three of us got together one day in a lift, very small lift, three very big men. We went to a room and that man showed me how to turn my voice from a bass baritone into a baritone. And thank you, Nello.
Yeah, well, I suspect there are many bass baritones striving for that baritone range at the top, and then finally, if there is one, either I suppose as a baritone or as any sort of voice part, is there a particular aria, a particular piece of music, a particular opera that you think that everyone in the world should hear before they die in their lifetime? Do you think there's something that a piece of music or an opera of some sorts that people need to experience for the fulfillment of their own humanity?
Okay, if it's piano music, Rachmaninoff #2. The first time I heard it was with the Australian stroke British pianist Piers Lane at the Barbican, and I just sat there thinking, oh my God, just listen to this. But then, you know, we have Spartacus. That's another one people should listen to. I was introduced to a piece last night called, I think it's called Abschied auf der Erde by Brahms. Oh my God, listen to them. If I want to talk about sopranos, there are endless arias people should listen to. I react really quickly to music. It's very difficult. If I'm in a particular mood, you put on something, I can cry instantly because I've trained myself to go right to it and not hesitate. But, you know, I love the Beethoven fiddle. I grew up, the other musician my mother played was Kreisler, the violinist. So I grew up with more than just singing. All I can say is go out there. The world's your oyster. Unfortunately, a lot of singers go, oh, I'm a singer, and don't pay any attention to anything else. Or, oh, I'm a pianist. Go and listen to everybody's genre. You can learn from everybody because a singing teacher will say, I want you to sound like a cello. A cello teacher will say, I want you to sound like a singer. We are a lot closer related than we give ourselves credit for. But I've had I don't say I've had, I'm still having a very lucky life with the best drug that I was ever introduced to, and it knows no bounds. And there's so much. And through my students, I learn more. I love it when my students say, what do you think of this? And I go, never heard of it. And then I write back and go, bloody hell, yes, why not? But you have to be secure in yourself to accept that you don't know everything. And that's a big challenge in life because you're then saying, I'm vulnerable. But if you do, you will find a lot more out there. So there is no limit. Just go and listen. Put on things you don't know.
I think that's really wonderful. The idea of music as a drug and being able to accept that we don't know everything, because it just means that there's more of it out there to explore and more of it out there to listen and inhabit and enjoy.
The only thing I can tell you about is I said to my father one day, it's the best drug I've ever taken, and I said it has no side effects, and he went, we'll talk about that later. But the side effects are harmless. What? You become passionate about Verdi, or you become passionate about Mozart, or Vaughan Williams, or Michael Head, or any of these people. Is that such a bad thing?
Absolutely.
And when my students introduce me to composers I don't know, I love it. And I've only got to hear a couple of bars and I'll make a comment. It either talks to me or it doesn't. And sometimes I have one student who sends me things and I'll write back and the comment will be, but go through the whole thing. Just don't go for the emotional bit at the beginning. There's always something that grabs you in. And that's how I've accepted opera work. I find one thing in the opera that I like, and that's the drug that I take, then I'm hooked. And the opening of Rachmaninoff #2, you just sit there and you can't go anywhere else.
Allow it to wash over you.
Allow you to become one and understand, or start asking, what did this man go through to write this? I did a piece in Australia. I did the Australian premiere of a piece by Bernd Alois Zimmermann, and it was the last piece he composed before committing suicide. And I had learnt it in the tempo that it was written. And the conductor said, it doesn't sound fraught enough. This man died 8 days later. I want to hear that absolute agitato. We doubled the tempo. My vocal cords, I don't think ever knew what was going on. But I then got to understand that lack of control he was having. Otherwise, why did he kill himself? And when you experience that, or, you know, Verdi is the only composer I've never doubted. He talks to me. I don't question him. I have found a kindred spirit in whatever he writes. Go there, permit yourself to go there, and you'll be surprised what you learn to like. And, you know, I didn't know the Beethoven Fiddle Sonata. I sure as hell do now. I now know who Janet Baker is because people took the time to educate me. And I asked. Sometimes I didn't ask, pardon me. I was advised. Challenge your teachers. You have to. I want to be challenged. I don't want you to be a yes boy. I want you to question what I'm saying.
Well, and I hope that many of our students will take you up on the offer to challenge you whenever you arrive in April.
I accept the challenge gladly, and no doubt we will plaster it all over social media. So they will either see it on the Van Mildert YouTube channel, they'll see it on the VM Dimensions Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook. I look forward to sharing this knowledge, because I put a posting up the other day and it said, when someone dies, we just don't lose a chapter, we lose a library. You've got to get into that library before that library is no longer there.
Absolutely, and let's hope many of our students take the opportunity to explore that library. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today, David. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I hope that everyone listening at home has enjoyed it, and enjoyed exploring your career and your teaching and everything else as much as I have. And we very much look forward to having you with us in person finally in Mildert in April.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. I will not permit myself, and I hit the wall like everyone during COVID. We all were suddenly faced with a reality. I'm not permitting myself to go there. I'm staying as positive I can. I'm working towards it, because the bottom line is, if I don't, no one will do it for me. That's the hardest thing about a performing career. You have to do it for yourself first.
Absolutely. Well,
you stand alone on the stage. No one else is there to help you. But let's keep our fingers crossed that April, I think it's April 29th, April 27th.
That's the one, I think. Yeah.
Yep. It comes ahead with no problem, and we lift the roof off Van Mildert College and cause the ducks good reason to evacuate the pond for the evening.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Well, thank you very much, David, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Signing off from Berlin. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.